The auction table had been set up in the long gallery at Renfield beneath the row of portraits, and Cassandra Vale stood at the back of the room with her father's account books held against her chest because there was nowhere left in the house to put them down. Every surface had been ticketed. The escritoire wore a paper tag on a length of string. So did the fire irons, and the japanned tea caddy, and the harp that no one had tuned since the winter, and the 11th chair from the dining table which had been sold separately from the other 10. The auctioneer's clerk had written her father's library into 4 lots, and described the whole of it, 640 volumes, as sundry books. It was the 3rd of October, the morning of the sale, and the gallery smelled of wet wool and other people's breakfasts. Lady Harriet Ambrose sat in the second row with her fan closed in her lap and her gloves folded over it, and when the woman beside her leaned in to ask who the tall girl at the back might be, Lady Harriet answered, without turning her head. "The steward's daughter," she said. "That is all she has ever been. She has simply been permitted to forget it for rather a long time." Cassandra heard it. She had been standing near enough to hear it, and Lady Harriet had known that she was standing near enough, and the arithmetic of the remark was complete in the moment it landed. Her father had run Renfield for 29 years. He had been dead for 5 months. In the drawing rooms of 3 counties, the fact of his stewardship had been quietly reissued as the fact of her station, and the reissue had happened so smoothly that she had not been present for any part of it. She kept her face still. Her hands, which were not so obedient, tightened on the ledgers, until the leather corner pressed a line into her forearm through the sleeve. At the front of the gallery, the auctioneer cleared his throat and began to read the terms of the sale, and it was in the middle of that reading, in the small silence between the description of the acreage and the description of the tenancies, that the door at the far end of the room opened. A man came in out of the rain. He did not remove his hat immediately, which was the first thing wrong with him, and he did not look at the auctioneer, which was the second. He stood inside the door with the wet still darkening his shoulders, and he looked at the portraits, one after another, in order the way a man reads a page. Water came off the hem of his greatcoat and made a small, clean mark on the floor. Nobody spoke to him. Nobody in that room could have said afterwards why nobody spoke to him. Cassandra, from where she stood, saw only his profile against the gray window light, and the thing she noticed first was not his face, but his stillness, the particular arrested quality of a man who has arrived somewhere he has spent years being unable to arrive. Then he took off his hat, and the woman 2 seats in front of Lady Harriet made a sound in her throat, and the auctioneer's voice stopped as though a hand had been laid across his mouth. If you have ever watched a room decide something all at once, without a word passing between any 2 people in it, you will know what happened next. Stay with her. She did not yet understand what she was looking at. The man crossed to the table and read the topmost paper on it, upside down, without touching it. "You are selling Renfield," he said. "The estate is under sale, by order of the executors," the auctioneer said. "Sir, if you are a bidder, the register is at the door. I am not a bidder." He set his hat on the corner of the table on the papers deliberately so that the papers could not be lifted without lifting the hat. "The tenancies you have just described, the Low Farm, the Barrow Ground, the 12 acres at the water, those were not the estates to sell in 1809, and they are not the estates to sell now." "And who," said Lady Harriet, rising, "informs us of this?" He turned. The light came at him from the window and found nothing soft anywhere in his face. "Julian Renfield," he said. "Your nephew, madam. I have been 11 years gone, and I have come back at an inconvenient hour." Cassandra's father had kept the estate books in a hand so small and even that reading them was like reading brickwork, and Cassandra had been taught to read them at 9 years old, sitting on a footstool at his elbow, while he explained the difference between a rent and a right. She had been the only child of a man who had been given a great house to run and no house of his own to leave, and so what he had left her instead was competence which the world had valued at nothing. She was 24. Her gown that morning was gray, 3 seasons old, turned once at the cuffs and clean. Among the sale day crowd in their traveling silks, she looked precisely like what Lady Harriet had called her. The Renfields had held the land for 200 years, and had spent the last 30 of those years mislaying it. The old master, Julian's father, had died in 1814 believing his son dead in the peninsula, and had left everything in a will that had gone to the executors, and the executors had found the debts, and the debts had found the auctioneer. The heir presumptive was a cousin in Bath who had never seen the place. Lady Harriet, the old master's sister, had lived at Renfield for 19 years, arranged its dinners, seated its guests, and had been assured by everyone she had ever met that her judgment of persons was infallible. Her judgment of Cassandra had been rendered in May, on the day of the steward's funeral, and had never been revised. The auction did not proceed. The auctioneer, a careful man from Norwich, looked at the hat lying on his papers and at the 11 faces looking at him, and adjourned the sale until such time as the executors might be consulted. The room emptied in 20 minutes. By noon there were 4 people left in the long gallery, and one of them was the man who had come in out of the rain, and one of them was Cassandra, who had not moved from the back wall, and who had heard him say the words, "The barrow ground," and had known instantly and completely that he was right. She knew he was right because she had found the same thing in March, and had told her father, and her father had been too ill by then to do anything but close his eyes. Julian came down the gallery towards her. Close to, he was perhaps 34, and the 11 years had put something in his face that his portrait at the far end of the room, painted at 22, did not have any provision for. "You are the steward's daughter," he said. "Yes, my lord. You have his books." "I have his books." He looked at the ledgers against her chest. He did not ask for them. That was the first thing about him she could not account for, and she was to spend a great deal of the following weeks failing to account for him. "Do not let anyone take those," he said. "Not the executors, not my aunt, not the man from Norwich. Come to the study at 4. It was a command. She heard it as a command. Her body, which had been cold since May, registered something else entirely, and she stood in the emptying gallery with her face hot and her arms full of her father's handwriting, and told herself with great firmness that a man who had walked into his own house and found it ticketed for sale had spoken sharply to the first servant he saw. She was the steward's daughter. She had a very clear idea of what she was. At 4 o'clock the study was cold, and he had not lit the fire, and she found him standing at the window with his hands behind his back, and she understood that he had been standing there for some time. The study was where her father had died. There was a chair by the fire that no one had sat in since May. Julian had not sat in it either. "Sit down," he said without turning. "Not there. The other one." She sat in the other one. What followed was 4 hours of work. He asked her for the barrow ground, and she gave him the barrow ground. The entry, in 1809, in her father's hand recording that the 12 acres at the water had been conveyed to the Renfield heir absolutely, in his own name, by his grandmother's settlement, and had never been merged with the estate. She gave him the rent roll and the tenancy dates, and the name of the tenant at Low Farm, Thomas Reed, who had paid his rent to the estate for 11 years because there had been no one else to pay it to. She gave him the debt schedule, and the £4,000, and the date the executors had filed, and the fact which she had discovered in March, that the executors' inventory listed the barrow ground as estate land, on the authority of nothing at all except that it had always been listed so. He listened without interrupting. He had taken the chair opposite hers and turned it slightly, so that he faced the table and not the fireplace, and he sat with one hand loose on his knee and did not move it for an hour. The light went out of the window by degrees. She lit the candles herself because no one came, and the flame found the gilt on the spines of the books that had been sold that morning as sundry books and were still, for the moment, on the shelves. She read him the rent roll. 41 tenancies, the acreage of each, the quarter days, the arrears. She read him the Michaelmas quarter of 1812 when the wheat had failed, and her father had taken half rents from 9 farms and made the difference out of the timber account and entered it, plainly, with a note of the reason, in a house where nobody had ever asked to see the note. She read him the funeral charges of 1814. She read him the £4,000, which was not a farming debt at all, but the residue of a horse and a lawsuit, and 19 years of a household run on the scale of a family that no longer existed. Twice he asked her to read a line again. Once he stopped her and said, "Say that date." And she said it, and he was quiet for a moment. "You found this in March," he said. "Yes, you told my father's man of business." "I told my father." "He was ill. I wrote to the man of business in Norwich." He did not reply. She heard her own voice go flat and could not prevent it. "I wrote 3 times. Why?" The question sat between them. There was no advantage in it for her. There had never been any advantage in it for her. If Renfield sold, she was turned out. If Renfield did not sell, she was turned out rather more slowly. She had written the letters because a lie had been written into a book, and she had been raised by a man who did not permit lies to stand in books, because it was wrong, she said. In the ledger, it was simply wrong. He looked at her for the length of 3 breaths. She counted them, afterwards, lying awake. "Eat something," he said. "You have not eaten today. Ring for it, or do not. But eat." She had not eaten that day. She had not told him so. Word of him went out over the county before the roads had dried. In the drawing rooms it was said that the missing Renfield had come home the very hour the hammer was to fall, and had walked in with rain on him like a man out of a ballad, and had stopped the sale with a sentence. That was the version that traveled. The version Cassandra saw was a man who did not sleep, who was in the estate office at 6 in the morning, and who could not be in the same room as the chair by the fire for longer than a quarter of an hour. He had been 11 years gone. He did not say where. He said the word Salamanca once. In the study, in a low voice, at the end of a sentence about something else entirely, and did not say it again. He rode out to Low Farm on the Tuesday and took her with him because she knew the ground, and he did not. And Reed came out of the yard with his hat in his hands and stopped dead when he saw who was on the horse. "They told us he was dead, sir. They were mistaken. 11-year Reed's mouth worked. He was 60, and had known Julian as a boy. We put your name in the church, sir, on the board, with the others." Something happened in Julian's face. It was very small, and it was gone before Reed had finished speaking, and Cassandra, who had been watching the ground, happened to be looking up. "Leave it there," Julian said. "It cost the parish money to cut it." He asked Reed about the rent. They stood in the yard while he asked it, in a thin rain, with the geese going up and down along the wall, and a dog watching from the barn door. And Reed answered every question exactly, as a man does who has been waiting 11 years to be asked. He had paid it to the estate, always, every quarter, to Mr. Vale, who had never once been short with a man who was late. In the bad year, he had been 3 quarters behind, and Mr. Vale had come out himself in December, and walked the field with him and gone away again and written down half. "Half, sir," Reed said, and never spoke of it after. Not once, not in 9 years, not when he'd have been within his rights. He said it in front of Cassandra, and did not look at her when he said it, which was its own kind of courtesy. And Cassandra looked at the mud on her boots, and did not trust her face. Reed's wife brought out bread and small beer on a board, because the master of Renfield was in her yard, and there was nothing else in the house to bring. Julian took it standing, in the rain, and ate it, and thanked her by name, and Cassandra watched a woman of 60 go pink to the ears, and understood quite suddenly, and with some resentment, that he had done it on purpose and that it had cost him nothing, and that it had been the right thing to do anyway. Riding back, Julian said, "Your father kept the Barrow ground rents separate." "Yes, in a second book." "Yes." "Where is the second book?" "In my room," she said. "Under the bed, my lord. There was nowhere else that had not been ticketed." He laughed. It was not much of a laugh. 1 breath, gone at once. And he looked as surprised by it as she was. It was the 8th day. She would remember later that it had been the 8th day. Lady Harriet received her in the morning room on the Thursday, and did not ask her to sit. "You have been riding out with my nephew. I have been showing him the tenancies, my lady." "Yes, Lady Harriet smoothed her glove. She was 61, handsome, entirely certain. "Miss Vale, I am going to say something to you which you will not like. And I am going to say at once because I have some affection for the memory of your father, who was an honest man in a position that does not always attract them. You have been useful this fortnight. Useful is a real thing, and I do not diminish it. You must understand what my nephew is. He has come back to a house that was being sold out from under him, and he has seized upon the nearest instrument. You are the instrument. When the matter is settled, he will marry somebody, and the somebody will not be the steward's daughter, and I would spare you the discovery. There was a fire in the grate." Cassandra stood in front of it with her hands folded, and heard the words, "the steward's daughter," for the second time in 11 days, in a different room, in a voice that meant them kindly, which was worse. "I understand you, my lady," she said. "I doubt it," said Lady Harriet. "But you are quick, and you may come too." It was not cruelty. That was the thing Cassandra could not get past, walking back along the corridor. Lady Harriet had said the truest thing anyone had said to her since May, and had said it in order to be kind, and had been entirely wrong about only one particular, which was that Cassandra had never for 1 hour supposed anything else. She had a very clear idea of what she was. Her body, however, did not. Her body had begun to know where he was in a room, without being told. It knew when he came in at the far door with his coat still on. It knew, at dinner, in the servants' hall, 2 floors below the dining room, that a horse had come up the drive at 9, and that it was his. She noticed these treacheries with something close to embarrassment, the way one notices a hem coming down, and she folded them away and went on with the ledgers. They folded badly. On the Saturday he came into the estate office to find a figure, and stood at her shoulder to read it, and his hand came down on the table beside hers to steady the page, near enough that she could feel the cold coming off his sleeve, and she went absolutely still. He read the line. He did not move his hand. Neither of them said anything at all for the space of 4 heartbeats, which she could hear distinctly, in her own throat. Then he said the figure aloud, and took his hand off the table, and went out. She sat looking at the place on the wood where it had been. She wanted him. She permitted herself the word once, in the empty office, in her own head, in the way one permits oneself to look at a thing on a high shelf that is not for sale. Then she put it back on the shelf, and wrote the figure into the column. The executor sent a man from Norwich. His name was Mr. Pell. He was the man of business who had not answered her 3 letters, and he arrived on a wet Monday with a clerk and a box of papers and an opinion. The opinion was that the Barrow ground had been treated as estate land for a generation, that the settlement of the grandmother was an old instrument, and that the heir presumptive in Bath had a claim which the executors were bound to consider. He said all this in the study, standing, with his hat in his hand, and he said it to Julian, and at no point did he look at the woman sitting at the table with a second book open in front of her. "The settlement is dated," Julian said. "Dated instruments may be superseded, sir." "Then produce what supersedes it." Mr. Pell's face did something small and unhappy. "The estate's practice, sir. Consistent over 20 years' practice." Julian said the word, the way a man sets down something he has found in his food. "Miss Vale, read him the entry." She read it. She read the date, the conveyance, the grandmother's name, and the annotation in her father's hand made in 1809, recording that the 12 acres at the water stood in the heir's own name and were not to be entered in the estate rental. Her voice did not shake. She had been reading her father's hand for 15 years, and she read it now as though it were her own. Mr. Pell heard her out. Then he addressed his reply, courteously, to Julian. "Sir, if the young person's recollection is accurate, the point may bear examination in the proper quarter." The young person. The room held still. Cassandra kept her eyes on the page. "It is not her recollection," Julian said. "It is the estate's own book, which your office has had the keeping of, and which your office did not read. She wrote to you 3 times. Mr. Pell's clerk stopped writing. 3 letters, Julian said, in March, April, and May of this year, to your office at Norwich, giving you the date and the instrument and the page from a woman with nothing whatever to gain by it, and you did not answer one of them. And you have come here this morning to tell me that the estate's practice has been consistent." He had not raised his voice at any point. "It has. That is what she wrote to tell you. The fire settled." Mr. Pell looked at his hat. "Sit down, Miss Vale." She had not realized she had stood up. That night, she could not sleep. She went down at 2 in the morning for the second book, because she had left it in the study, and she did not like it out of her sight, and the study door was open, and the candle was lit, and he was at the desk with something in his hand. It was a small thing. He was turning it over. When she stopped in the doorway, he did not startle and did not put it away. And she saw that it was a plain steel button, the size of a shilling, worn bright. "You should be asleep," he said. "Pa, it. So should you, my lord." He set the button on the desk and looked at it. "I had a brother," he said. She had not known. Nobody in the county had known, because it had not been anybody's business to say, and because the boy had never been at Renfield. "Not my father's," Julian said. "That is not the scandal it sounds. My mother had a sister in Leicestershire who died of a fever. And there was a boy, and my father would not have him in this house. And I was 19, and I did not fight him about it, because I was 19 and my father had a way of ending conversations. His name was Nicholas. He went for a soldier because there was nothing else for him to go for, and I bought my commission the same year, and I told myself it was so that I could keep an eye on him." He stopped. She stood in the doorway and did not move. "He was at Salamanca," Julian said. "I was not. I had leave and I took it. I was 40 miles off eating a very good dinner, and I did not know for 11 days. And then I did not come home." He turned the button once, with one finger. "That is the whole of it. There is no more than that. My father wrote to me twice, and I did not open the letters, and then he was dead. And then a man in a coffee house in Lisbon read me a paragraph in an English newspaper about the sale of an estate in Norfolk, and here I am, 11 years late, with my hat on a table." The candle guttered. She thought of the church at Low Farm with his name cut into the board. "Your father put your name up," she said. "Yes, and Nicholas no." He said, "There was no board for Nicholas. He was nobody's son." She did not tell him it was not his fault, because it was not her place, and because he had not asked, and because it would have been a lie, or near enough to one, and she had been raised by a man who did not permit lies to stand. She came into the room and picked up the second book, and stood with it. And after a moment she said, "The only true thing she had. He is on the estate books," she said. "Nicholas, my father entered him." 1805. A suit of clothes and a place on the Leicester coach, charged to the household. "He is written down, my lord." Somebody wrote him down. Julian did not answer for a long time. Then he put his hand flat on the desk, and left it there, and said, "Go to bed, Cassandra," her given name. It went through her like cold water down a wrist. She got out of the room before her face could do anything about it. If this is the moment you have been waiting for, I would ask you to wait a little longer. So did she. The dinner at Michaelmas Corridor had been in the Renfield calendar for 40 years, and Lady Harriet gave it, because Lady Harriet had always given it, and 30 people sat down in the dining room under the candles with the good service out. It was the first time the house had been full since the old master died. It was, Cassandra understood, a demonstration. The estate was intact. The family was in it. The world had been mistaken, and Lady Harriet had never for one moment doubted her nephew. Miss Georgiana Marsh sat at Julian's left. She was 20. She was the daughter of the largest landholder between Renfield and the sea. She wore ice blue, and she had been told her entire life that she was the correct choice. And there was nothing in the least wrong with her, which was the difficulty. Cassandra was not at the table. Cassandra had been sent for at 9, because Mr. Pell had come down from Norwich for the settlement papers, and Mr. Pell wanted a date out of the rental, and so she came up the back stairs with the second book under her arm, and into a room of 30 people at their fruit. She had not been warned. She was in grey. The candles were very bright. "Ah," said Lady Harriet, into a lull that had arrived from nowhere. "Miss Vale." "Yes. My nephew's steward's daughter. Everyone." She has been quite indispensable. One hardly knows how we should have managed the accounts without her, and I am sure she will be as glad as any of us when the business is finished and she may go back to being what she is." It was said in a warm voice. Several people smiled. One or two laughed, comfortably. The way people laugh when the person laughed at is not, strictly speaking, present. Cassandra stood in the doorway with the book against her chest, and the whole length of the table between her and the man at the far end of it, and she waited for him. He did not move. He was looking at his aunt. His face had nothing in it at all. Miss Marsh said something to him and he answered her, and a moment closed over like water, and Mr. Pell took the book out of Cassandra's hands and found his date, and she went back down the stairs. She did not cry. She got as far as the estate office and sat down in the dark with her hands in her lap, and thought with perfect clarity that Lady Harriet had done her the honor of being right, and that the honest thing now was to be gone before the pity started. Above her, through 2 floors, she could hear the dinner going on. It did not falter. That was the part she could not stop hearing. 30 people had watched a woman be put in her place, and had gone back to their fruit inside of half a minute, and the room had closed and the candles had gone on burning. And somewhere at the end of the table, a man who had said her given name in a dark study at 2 in the morning had been asked a question by a girl, in ice blue, and had answered it. She sat there until her hands were cold, and then she got up and lit a candle because sitting in the dark was a thing she had watched her father refuse to do all his life. She wrote her resignation that night, in her father's hand, which was to say in the hand he had taught her, and she wrote out for whoever came after her the whole of the Barrow Ground, the dates, the settlement, the annotation, the 3 letters to Norwich and their dates, everything she knew, 4 pages of it, so that the thing would stand in a book, whether or not she was standing anywhere near it. At 6 in the morning, she left the pages on the desk in the study and went to see Thomas Reed to tell him she was going because he had paid his rent to her father for 11 years, and he was owed the courtesy she did not go quietly. That was the thing Julian discovered at 7 o'clock. Standing in the study with 4 pages in his hand, she had not run. She had done the work first, all of it, then written a letter that did not mention herself except in the last line, and gone out into the rain to tell a tenant farmer to his face. He read the 4 pages twice. Then he went and found his aunt at her breakfast. What passed between them, no servant afterwards could report, because he shut the door, which he had not done in 11 years, of not being there. It lasted 11 minutes. Lady Harriet came out of it with her back very straight and did not take her drive that morning. The settlement was signed on the Friday, in the long gallery, because that was where the table was, and because Mr. Pell had brought the executors, and because Lady Harriet had let it be known that the county might attend, and the county had come. The portraits were still up. The tickets had been taken off the furniture, and there were pale marks where the string had rubbed. 31 people. The same room. Very nearly the same faces. Mr. Pell read the recitals. The estate, the debts, the £4,000, the Barrow Ground, excluded from the sale and standing, in the name of Julian Renfield, absolutely, by the settlement of 1809, as evidenced by the estate's own rental. Miss Marsh stood by the window with her mother. Lady Harriet sat in the second row in the same chair, with her fan closed in her lap. Cassandra was at the back. She had come because Mr. Pell had required her attestation of the ledger entry, and for no other reason on earth, and she had her father's book in her arms, and she was leaving on the noon coach. "The court will require the attestation of the person who identified the entry," said Mr. Pell. "Miss Vale, if you would come forward." She came forward. The room turned to watch her come, 31 faces, and the walk was long, and she made it. Her shoes were worn at the heel, and the gallery floor was bare board, and every step of it was audible, and she thought, going up the length of that room, that this was the last thing she would ever do at Renfield, and that she would do it properly. She put the book on the table and turned it round, and put her finger on the line. "There," she said. Mr. Pell bent over it. He read it twice, moving his lips, and something went out of his shoulders that had been in them since October. "And you are, for the record." And Julian crossed the room. It was 3 strides. The room heard them. He came around the end of the table and stopped beside her, and took her hand off the ledger. and kept it in front of 31 people, in the same light, under the same portraits, where a woman in the second row had once explained to her neighbor exactly what this person was. The silence went on rather a long time. Nobody in it breathed. "She is Miss Cassandra Vale," Julian said, "and I intend to marry her." Lady Harriet's fan came half open. It stopped. Her hand did not seem to know what to do next, and it stayed like that. The fan neither opened nor closed, for as long as it took her to find a face, and the face she found was not the one she had come in with. "Julian," she said. "Yes," he said, "you will," and did not look at her. Miss Marsh, at the window, looked at the two of them for a moment. Then she looked at the floor, and then, because she was 20, and not a fool, she looked back up with an expression of such plain and immediate understanding that her mother took her elbow. Mr. Pell cleared his throat and inquired in a voice that had gone up half a tone whether the attestation might proceed. "It may," Julian said. Cassandra heard her own voice, from somewhere, give her name and the date and the fact of the entry, and Mr. Pell wrote it down, and the whole business took 4 minutes, and the county watched every second of it. Then Julian said quietly, only to her, "The coach at noon." "Yes. Do not take it." "That is a command, my lord." "It is," he said. "It is the last one. After this you may do as you please, and I shall have to live with it." Lady Harriet found her, an hour later, in the corridor outside the study, and Cassandra stopped and waited to be told again what she was. Miss Vale. The old woman's chin was up. Whatever had been said behind the breakfast-room door, she had not been broken by it. She had been moved, which is a different thing and takes longer. "I said something to you in the morning room, in October. I have been turning it over. I find that I was mistaken in my facts and that I was quite sure of them. And I do not care to examine which of those two things I dislike more." She drew her gloves through her hand. "I shall be at Bath by Christmas. The Dower House is cold, and I have never liked it. You will not be rid of me, but you will be at some distance from me, which I am given to understand is the modern preference." "My lady." "I am not apologizing," said Lady Harriet. "No, my lady, good," she said. And after a moment, "He would not sit in that chair. Did you know? 19 years. I have known that boy, and I did not know one thing about him. And you knew where the second book was?" She looked away down the corridor. "I have been very certain, all my life, and it has cost me almost nothing until now," she went. Cassandra stood in the corridor and found that she had no triumph in her anywhere, only a kind of tiredness, and under it something warm, beginning very slowly to come up, the way heat comes into a room a good while after the fire is lit. They were married in the parish church at Low Farm in the second week of December, quietly, with Reed's wife holding the flowers, because there was nobody else to hold them, and afterwards it snowed for 3 days and shut the roads. The church was cold, and there were 11 people in it. The board, with the names of the parish dead, was on the north wall, where it had been since the war, and Julian's name was on it, third from the bottom, cut deep and painted over once. He did not look at it going in. Coming out with her hand on his arm and the snow beginning, he stopped in front of it for as long as it takes to read 4 words. And Cassandra stood beside him and led him, and neither of them said anything. And then they went out into the churchyard where the light was going gray and gold at once along the tops of the stones. The house was very quiet. The tickets were gone. The harp had been tuned. In the study the fire was lit, both fires, every day now, and the chair by the hearth had been moved 6 inches to the left, and sat in, first by her, then by him, and after that, by whoever came in first. On the 3rd evening of the snow, she found him at the estate desk with the second book open, and a pen in his hand, and he had written a line into it, in the column where her father had entered the household charges of 1805. "Nicholas Ware, of Leicestershire, brother." "It is not the correct book," she said over his shoulder. "No. It has no business being in the rental. None at all." he said, and set the pen down. She put her hand on the back of his neck, which she had not done before, and he leaned his head against her arm and stayed there. And neither of them said anything for a while, and the snow went on past the window in the dark. On the desk beside the ledger where he had put it down and left it was the plain steel button, worn bright, catching the firelight. It was not turned over. It was not held. It simply lay there in a warm room in a house that had not been sold, and the woman who had written the entry that saved it stood beside the man who had come home too late for everything except this. Thank you for staying with them to the end.